Kneel before Zod.
Terence Stamp died alone on a Sunday morning in 2025. The 87-year-old actor was found in his London flat by a cleaner. He never had children, never found lasting love, and spent his final years on dialysis treatments he kept secret from the world. His last diary entry was haunting. For decades, he dated women 40 years younger, only to watch them leave and marry someone else. The man who once had Julie Christie and inspired Beatles songs ended his life in complete isolation. What drove him to such loneliness remains his darkest secret. Terence Henry Stamp was born at 7:10 in the morning on July 22, 1938, inside a hospital just a few streets away from the docks in London's East End. He arrived quietly, but the world around him wasn't going to stay quiet for long. 2 years later, German planes darkened the skies, and baby Terence became one of the many children who slept underground every night. His family had bunks along the northbound track at Bethnal Green Station. They stayed there for 57 nights in a row during one terrifying autumn in 1940. That time underground left a scar he never quite shook off. He later turned down any film that involved submarines. He once said in an interview that just the smell of diesel in a metal tube brought him straight back to those nights under Stepney. His father, Thomas, wasn't around much. He worked as a stoker in the Merchant Navy, and between 1939 and 1946, he crossed the Atlantic 223 times. He'd vanish for 9 months at a time and show up only at Christmas, smelling of steam and rum. Little Terence would memorize Gary Cooper scenes from old films just to get a nod or a smile from him. That hunger for attention from a man who was always leaving turned into something more complicated as he grew up. He later joked that he got attached to directors who yelled at him, thinking it was some kind of twisted fatherly love. The Stamp family didn't have much. They squeezed into a 2-room flat in Bow and paid rent that would be just over £40 in today's money. Terence wore shirts sewn from flour sacks. He once admitted he stole tinned fish from a bombed-out shop. Acting, he said, started out as a trick to survive. He'd copy movie stars to get neighbors to give him tea cakes. Years later, when he had a fancy kitchen in Belgravia, he hung those same tins on the wall, like little reminders of where he came from. He called it penance décor, and said every dinner party began with a confession. In 1945, when a V-2 rocket exploded near their street, it blew out the windows and broke something inside Terence too. He developed a stutter so bad he couldn't say his own name unless he tapped his leg to push the words out. For 3 years, he went to speech therapy every week and practiced Shakespeare lines in a whisper. That whispering, stretched-out speech ended up turning his voice into something unforgettable. That deep, slow sound he became famous for, especially in that chilling line as General Zod, was shaped by a childhood bomb. When he made enough money, he paid to renovate the speech clinic and had a plaque placed there that read, "To the bomb that made my voice." At 15, he dropped out of school and tried to chase his dreams. He hitchhiked to Soho with barely any money, carrying a worn-out movie magazine and visions of Marlon Brando in his head. Police found him sleeping rough on a bandstand in Green Park and sent him home. He ran away 2 more times that summer. Each time he told the officers the same thing: "Don't take me back. I'm bound for the pictures." His shoes were stolen once while he slept on a bench. Still, when he auditioned for drama school, he showed up barefoot and got the scholarship anyway. He was 23 and working for the Royal Mail, carrying parcels around London when everything changed. Director Peter Ustinov was casting extras for a film called Billy Budd, and Terence turned up in work boots and borrowed pants. Ustinov asked him to read one line. That's all it took. Legend says he whispered to a producer, "That's Billy." Within 2 days, Terence had a 5-year contract, a $2,000 signing bonus, and a plane ticket to Malta for the shoot. He'd never faced a camera or had a proper acting lesson, but the director rewrote parts of the script just for him and told the studio to insure him for $100,000. The crew joked that the film's real miracle wasn't the story. It was the unknown kid who landed the lead. When Billy Budd premiered, Terence was just 24. 3 months later, he got a letter from the Academy. He had been nominated for Best Supporting Actor. He was the youngest British actor ever to be nominated, and it was his first film. His salary had been just $84 a week, while his Oscar rival Ed Begley was making $100,000 per movie. Bookmakers offered 7-to-1 odds that Terence might win, and people in London bet around £10,000 before the event. He didn't win in the end, but the buzz sparked a flood of new drama school applications in Britain. They called it the Billy Budd boom. Still, the awards didn't leave him empty-handed. Just weeks later, on March 5, 1963, he walked up to collect a Golden Globe as Most Promising Male Newcomer. He beat out James Caan, Keir Dullea, and Peter O'Toole. The vote was tight. Just 4 ballots made the difference. MGM ran wild with it, putting out flashy posters and seeing ticket sales jump 28% in New York that week alone. Terence was stunned and wired his mom, "Mom, your lad's done it. Brought the Globe home." That little trophy bumped his pay, too. His next movie earned him $10,000, more than 100 times what he made on Billy Budd. Flush with cash and ambition, he sailed to New York and somehow got into Lee Strasberg's private class at the Actors Studio. Strasberg didn't go easy. 5-hour sessions, full silence days, and notebook drills where you had to write out your feelings like autopsies. Al Pacino remembered him as the one with laser focus, like he'd swallowed a light bulb. When Terence came back to Britain, he brought all that raw intensity to his role in The Collector. British critics were stunned. He didn't act like the others. He cracked open his emotions on screen. Within 2 years, acting schools across the UK were copying his style. Even top directors admitted it felt like he'd kicked open a door no one even realized was locked. Then came the photos. David Bailey chose just 36 people for his famous book of portraits: the Beatles, the Stones, the Cray twins, and Terence Stamp. Bailey said he had the kind of face people didn't forget. Fashion magazines loved him. Vogue had him in nearly every issue for 2.5 years. One photo shoot even sold out an entire magazine. The National Portrait Gallery bought a photo of him, and it was the first time they ever paid for a picture of a living actor. Terence didn't ask for money. He liked the espresso and Bailey's jazz records. He later joked he probably made Bailey more money than he ever made himself. Around that time, Ray Davies from the Kinks wrote a song. He called it Waterloo Sunset, and when he sang about Terry and Julie, he meant Terence Stamp and Julie Christie, who were Britain's most talked-about couple back then. The song became a hit, selling 300,000 copies in a month. Terence remembered the first time he heard it. He was driving Julie's white Jaguar across Hammersmith Bridge, and she was singing along to every word. He said it was flattering, and a little scary, too. Before Terence came along, most actors rented tuxedos. He changed that. For the Billy Budd premiere, he wore a mohair suit with side adjusters that landed him on the front page of the Mirror. Soon, he was getting free clothes from top designers just for mentioning their names. Esquire named him one of the world's best-dressed men in 1965. When he wore a double-breasted coat in Modesty Blaze, a clothing chain copied it and sold 12,000 of them that winter alone. Michael Caine once said, "Terence could make a boiler suit look like Savile Row." The rest of us just queued at Savile Row and hoped. His flat in Knightsbridge became a hot spot. One Halloween night, the Beatles came over after a recording session. Terence served oysters and expensive brandy. Brian Jones once left a sitar behind, and Terence mailed it to a studio. Twiggy said he danced in his boots till dawn and made even Mick Jagger seem shy. He handed out party invites as little cards that read T.S. and U and tucked them into people's jackets when they weren't looking. The police got called for noise complaints over a dozen times, but no one ever got fined. The officers usually just asked for autographs. Later, Terence said he threw the parties, but never felt like he truly belonged. Bailey took pictures of the fun. Terence lived the hangover. On a chilly March day in 1962, at Pinewood Studios, Terence Stamp caught sight of a young extra he didn't recognize. Her name was Julie Christie. She was 22, standing among a crowd on the set of Billy Budd, when their eyes met. Stamp, already rising fast in the industry and fresh off an Oscar nomination, later said he felt like someone had pulled a rug from under him. It was instant. The director, Peter Ustinov, saw the way he kept looking at her and quietly gave Christie a bigger part just days later. By April, gossip columns had caught on. The Evening Standard ran a headline calling her Deck Girl Julie, and reporters were buzzing about how Stamp was sending her 6 red roses every day on set. It wasn't subtle, and it didn't stay private for long. By the next summer, they weren't just a couple, they were the couple. If you were in London in 1963, you couldn't miss them. When they showed up at the Café Royal for a film premiere in July, 27 photographers were waiting. It was chaos. They kissed for the cameras, and the next morning, that photo was everywhere. Magazines across Europe swooned over them. One even called them the honeymooners without a wedding. People started following them just for the chance to snap a picture. Paparazzi began working in shifts, just in case they showed up somewhere. Then one night, a songwriter saw them. February 1967. Ray Davies of the Kinks was walking near Waterloo Bridge when he spotted them holding hands after a film screening. Something about the way they looked, quiet, effortless, stuck with him. The phrase, "Terry meets Julie," popped into his head. That single image became the heart of Waterloo Sunset. He scribbled it down that same night, and by April, the song was recorded. Within weeks, it was a hit. Stamp later said it felt like their anthem. People would hum it when they walked by. Even when Davies changed the story years later, the first published lyrics still pointed to that moment on the bridge. But the shine began to fade behind the scenes. In 1965, studio bosses came to them with a wild idea: 5 films together, massive money, but only if they agreed to get married. Christie, fresh off a major award, said no. She wasn't going to tie herself down just to please executives. That one word caused a mess. Stamp's agent was furious. There was nearly $1 million on the line, and now it was gone. Then Christie took a big role in Dr. Zhivago, and suddenly she was filming in Spain, while Stamp was turning down offers just to stay close. But as her star rose, his didn't. She was now earning more than 10 times what he was. He admitted later that envy started to grow where love had been. In May 1967, things quietly broke. Christie met Warren Beatty during the Cannes Festival. 3 months later, she visited him in Texas while he was filming Bonnie and Clyde. Then she sent Stamp a telegram that simply said, "Need time, don't follow." That was it. The papers had a field day. Stamp later said it shattered something inside him. He stopped trusting beautiful people. Full stop. In his memoir, he wrote that it took 40 years for the pain to dull. Friends said he kept a photo of him and Julie in his wallet right until the day he died in 2025. He didn't stay single for long, but the next relationship came with its own trouble. While filming The Collector in early 1965, he started seeing Jean Shrimpton, 21, striking, the face of British fashion. The press adored them, but behind the gloss, things were already going wrong. Shrimpton eventually found out he had been managing her bookings behind her back and secretly taking a cut. He claimed it was for a surprise. She wasn't convinced. They had a furious argument in his Belgravia apartment, and she walked out, leaving his invitation to the Oscars sitting on the floor. That breakup hit hard. Stamp sold his Jaguar and disappeared, just left London and flew to India without saying much. When he came back, things weren't the same. In 1969, after months of silence, he was invited to dinner by Harry Saltzman, one of the Bond producers. They were scouting for the next 007. Stamp had the look, the charm, the accent. He seemed like the obvious choice. But instead of saying yes, he pitched a strange idea. Bond should start the movie in disguise, under full makeup, to ease the audience into a new face. Saltzman didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. Stamp never got a call back. He later said that night was his personal fork in the road, the moment his entire career could have turned. And it didn't turn the way he wanted. That same year, he filmed Poor Cow, Teorema, and The Mind of Mr. Soames, films the critics loved, but audiences didn't. Tickets didn't sell, and suddenly, he was being called box office poison. In just a year, he went from million-dollar roles to getting 0 offers. His agent confessed that no one wanted him anymore. Even his friend David Bailey left him out of a major photography exhibit, and Stamp took that as a sign. He said it felt like a funeral without the flowers. Terence Stamp was restless. The roles were fading, Julie Christie had left, and London didn't feel like home anymore. In the spring of 1970, he sold his flat in Primrose Hill for $35,000 and bought a one-way ticket that eventually dropped him in Mumbai. From there, he drifted to Pune and stepped into the world of the Osho ashram. He registered under the name Swami Devastananda. According to biographers, he was living on just 8 rupees a day, sleeping on a straw mat in a dorm packed with 20 others. A telegram dated July 12, 1970, shows him wiring all the money from his London bank straight to the ashram. He wasn't dabbling. He was all in. Years later, he'd laugh about it, saying he swapped Bond-level paychecks for boiled lentils and morning chants at 4. His friends back in London were stunned. Michael Caine said it best. Stamp had gone from Vogue covers to beggar sandals. Just like that. The change wasn't surface level. On day 1 in Pune, he shaved off his iconic black hair, gave up mirrors, slipped into a saffron robe, and accepted a new name, Ananda Bhava. It meant blissful being. Each day started before dawn. He'd meditate for hours in the Buddha hall, break for tea, and return for another deep dive in the evening. Commune records say this routine rarely changed. People who lived there remember him sweeping the courtyards, silent, focused, never talking about films. Sometime in late 1971, an Italian journalist spotted him. But when he tried to ask questions, Stamp simply replied, "That man is gone. Don't resurrect him." Even when his father passed away, it took 3 weeks for the news to reach him. He found out from a piece of paper pinned on a bulletin board. He wrote later that he felt the grief. But the ego never came back. When he arrived at the ashram, Stamp was struggling with ulcers. But within 8 months, he was performing poses most beginners couldn't dream of. He became especially good at one called the one-arm peacock. That's not a gentle stretch. It's a full-body balancing act. Osho's lead yoga teacher kept notes on his routine. Stamp was completing around 1/800 sun salutations every week. That's about 260 a day. He practiced breath control so well that he could hold a slow exhale for 2 full minutes. These weren't guesses. Readings were taken with a blood pressure monitor. In one of his talks, Osho even pointed at him as proof. A film star turned into a monk of steel, all through discipline and yoga. Years later, Stamp told a reporter that yoga didn't just fix his body, it pulled his mind back together. Each time he unknotted his spine, something deeper inside also loosened. Officially, the ashram was drug-free. But tucked away from the main spaces, there was a group experimenting quietly. They called it the Tantra Lab. It wasn't wild, no reckless tripping, just microdoses of Himalayan mushrooms paired with long meditation. One lab notebook from March 1972 showed Stamp's temperature rising to 103 degrees Fahrenheit and his heartbeat dropping to 42 beats per minute. That was all carefully recorded. He spoke later about a moment during one of these sessions where he felt his ego shatter like ice. All his film roles, Billy Budd, Zod, they drifted away. The group wore blindfolds during the sessions to intensify inner visuals. He once drew a vision from one of these journeys and titled it Blue-Eyed Void. The sketch made it into his memoir. He always insisted these weren't drug trips. The mushrooms didn't create illusions. They simply finished what the meditation had already started. By 1972, his money had nearly run out. Even his robe was falling apart at the knees. Osho still wanted him to stay, saying Hollywood needed actors who could see clearly now. Then a telegram arrived on November 17th. It was addressed, oddly, to Terence Stamp, but it offered a test role for Superman. He didn't reply right away. He sat in silence for 2 days, weighing it. Then he agreed, on one condition. If he took the job, part of his fee would go toward a children's clinic in the Pune slums. He flew out of India on January 3, 1973, saying to those around him, "I'll act again," yet never as the same man. On set months later, the crew couldn't help but notice. Between takes, dressed head to toe in General Zod's armor, he'd sit cross-legged and meditate. Something had changed, and it hadn't faded. He hadn't had a global hit in years when the Superman producers flew him from Pune to Pinewood Studios in 1977. They needed a villain. He gave them one. Stamp shaved his head into a dramatic widow's peak, developed a rigid military voice, and told the costume team to make Zod's black outfit longer so it could swirl like a cape. Superman opened on December 13, 1978. Zod was on screen for barely 2 minutes, but audiences left quoting him. Kneel before Zod wasn't in the script. Stamp had asked the director for a single commanding line. That one stuck. In 2007, it was voted one of the 50 greatest villain lines of all time. Even now, you can find it sampled in rap tracks and hidden in video game Easter eggs. Things got tense on the sequel. Director Richard Donner had finished most of the shooting before getting fired in late 1979. His replacement, Richard Lester, had a lighter touch. Suddenly, Zod was blowing toupees off people's heads for laughs. Stamp didn't like it. He confronted Lester outside the soundstage and told him Zod should feel like a broken dictator, not a clown. Lester replied that it was a comic book, not a Chekhov play. They argued for 3 days. The producers warned Stamp they'd cut his $270,000 paycheck if he didn't cooperate. Years later, he admitted the situation was disappointing, but said he simply couldn't afford to walk away. Superman 2 released in the summer of 1980 and made nearly $200 million. Stamp's Zod wasn't just a character now. He was an icon, but it came with a price. Stamp later admitted he felt boxed in. Everyone forgot his earlier work. He even turned down a £500,000 offer to appear in Superman 3. He didn't want to be stuck in the tights forever. And yet, irony had its way. Decades later, Warner Brothers brought him back into the Superman world, this time as Jor-El's voice in the series Smallville. They paid him $10,000 an episode. It proved that the role he feared would typecast him had quietly become his legacy. After Superman Thapind, Hollywood locked in its view. From 1981 to 1991, Stamp received 27 scripts. 24 were villain roles. He played 10 of them. He was a mob boss in The Hit, a brutal killer in Alien Nation, and a greedy tycoon in Wall Street. Internal casting notes from Orion Pictures literally had Zod at yes stamped next to bad guy roles. By the end of the decade, he joked in an interview that maybe he should just open a villain consulting firm. In that 10-year stretch, he was killed on screen 7 times. Then came a strange opportunity. In 1993, a script landed in his hands. It was called The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. His agent told him it would be career suicide. Stamp was 55, and the lead was a transgender widow. Studios might never hire him again, but he took it. The budget was small. His fee was $150,000. He learned to do his own prosthetics and filmed across the dusty heart of Australia. When it premiered at Cannes in 1994, the crowd stood for 18 minutes. The same man who once wore Kryptonian armor now accepted a Best Actor award from the Australian Film Institute. And just like that, the so-called career-ending role brought him back into the spotlight. It even led Steven Soderbergh to cast him in The Limey, a performance that earned Stamp his first Golden Globe nomination in over 3 decades. On the last day of 2002, something happened that surprised a lot of people. Terence Stamp, who was already 64 and had never been married, finally tied the knot. His bride was a 29-year-old pharmacist from Australia named Elizabeth O'Rourke. The age gap was massive, 35 years. Friends laughed that he was closer to being her grandfather than her husband. But Stamp didn't care. He had met her 4 years earlier in a Sydney pharmacy, and he hadn't stopped chasing her since. He called her from other countries, showed up without warning, and spent 5 years just trying to convince her. At one point, he even brought up some random statistic about age gap couples lasting 7 years, thinking it would help. She later joked that it probably cursed them. Their wedding was small and quiet, just 30 guests at a register office in London. No meat was served at the dinner. Stamp had become vegan decades earlier, after staying in an ashram in India. The newspapers couldn't help but crack a joke. Terry marries at last, but not Julie, referring to his famous old flame, Julie Christie, and a line from a Kinks song. That marriage didn't reach the 7-year mark after all. Just over 6 years later, in April 2008, Elizabeth filed for a quick divorce. She accused him of being distant, cold, and impossible to live with emotionally. But behind the scenes, it turned out that Stamp had actually wanted to end things 6 months earlier. He even offered to pay all the legal fees and said she could keep the flat they had shared in London. It wasn't really about money. He was worth about £12 million at the time. What hurt more, according to him, was the silence that had built between them. They'd started arguing about medicine. He believed in ancient Ayurvedic treatments, and she trusted science. When they caught colds, he would smugly say that his herbs worked better than her pills. The actual divorce lasted 90 seconds in court. It was one of the fastest celebrity breakups that year. Stamp had spent most of their marriage away on film sets, especially in New Zealand while filming Wanted, and many said they had been apart more than they were ever together. Despite playing strict fathers in so many films, Terence Stamp never had children. In one interview, he said he just wasn't cut out for fatherhood. He admitted he was too selfish too emotionally damaged, and scared he'd pass on the same kind of depression that had haunted him as a kid. During his marriage, he had frozen his sperm, just in case. But after the divorce, he had it destroyed. Out of 5 siblings, he was the only one who never had kids. Instead, he poured his love into the next generation. He remembered the birthdays of all 9 great-nieces and nephews and sent each of them $200 every year to buy books. They called him General Zod, a joke from his role in Superman, and he secretly loved it. At public Q&A events, whenever people asked why he never became a dad, he'd throw out statistics about older fathers being more likely to have kids with mental health conditions. It was part fact, part defense. But romance didn't stop with Elizabeth. Stamp had a pattern long before that. He always seemed to go for much younger women. Brigitte Bardot, Jean Shrimpton, even a yoga teacher he met on a beach in Goa. They were all years younger than him. These relationships usually didn't last long. His friends even had a name for it: the 18-month fade. Things would be exciting at first, but then he'd disappear into silence, retreats, or filming, and the women would be left feeling completely shut out. One woman once said he kissed her exactly for 1 minute, then went back to meditating like it was part of some timed ritual. Many of these women ended up marrying someone else not long after the breakup. 7 of them did, in fact. The tabloids started calling him the emotional detox. You dated him, broke up, and then suddenly found the love of your life. Even when he was over 80, Stamp was still on dating apps, only showing interest in women under 45. He rarely messaged first, though, claiming his spiritual teacher told him that desire leads only to disappointment. As the years passed, his health began to fail, though he never made it public. In 2022, doctors diagnosed him with stage 3 kidney disease. The damage, he believed, came from a lifetime of bad habits. Too much black coffee, too many mornings skipped without breakfast. He started dialysis treatments 3 times a week at a private hospital in London. The nurses were made to sign NDAs so the press wouldn't find out. After a minor stroke in early 2024, he began using a carved wooden cane that said Zod on the side. A crew member from Superman Santiu had given it to him years ago. Still, he didn't want pity. Even Guy Pearce, his co-star from Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, only found out Stamp was sick 2 weeks before his death. Stamp had always been private, but toward the end, he became even more so. His final diary entry, dated August 6, 2025, just said, "Breath short today, release date soon." 11 days later, on Sunday morning, August 17, 2025, a cleaner walked into his flat and found him still in bed, not breathing. The room was lined with books and faced Regent's Park. Paramedics arrived and pronounced him dead at 8:02 a.m. The cause was listed as natural, but the full results were still pending. That afternoon, his niece Jessica released a short message. It said he had died peacefully at home and asked for privacy. That was all. No details about how or why. This silence made the tabloids spin their own stories. Some guessed it was heart failure, others whispered about suicide. He was 87 years old when he died, far past what his mother had once warned him about when she said acting wasn't a job for someone with gray hair.